Hi, good morning. Do you hear me, Peter? No, I don't hear.
Yeah, Daniel, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Now, yes, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, so for the moment you can put your camera on dark. But since you can hear me, Daniel, I trust everybody can hear me.
Why?
And I will ask Bram to mute his microphone, but still share the slides in order to get started. At the same time, we wait 1 or 2 more minutes because we anticipate a bit more.
On this one? Not necessarily. I just wanted to work, but that wasn't working earlier.
Okay, that's it.
Put the microphone on mute.
Okay. Good morning. I see still some participants entering. So we wait 1 or 2 more minutes and then we get started. So please be patient and then we will get started in 1 or 2 minutes.
Peter, we cannot hear you. You are muted.
Yeah, this works better. So good morning, everyone. One more time. Thank you for joining us this morning here in this webinar. we are waiting Carlos Castel to join to moderate the webinar, but there is a little technicality here. So for the moment, I will moderate and introduce the webinar to you. And if you go to the next slide, Bram, you can see that we prepared this webinar as an informative session for you as a member to the General Assembly of DSO Entity. So I will briefly introduce the webinar, and then we go into the topic of this morning, the network code for demand response. And we have various sections in which we will inform you about the content and the structure of the network code and also the process, how it has been drafted and prepared. And in the first section on that, I will introduce you to the process. Then Torsten Knop will take over. He was a co-chair to the development team, and he will introduce you to some of the key topics for DSOs that are there in the network code. And then I will introduce the board decision that has been taken. And after that, we go into the voting procedure. However, after having introduced the section 3 by Torsten and section 4 by me, myself, we will open the floor for questions. And you can put them into the meeting chat, and we will follow them and answer them where possible. Let me tell you also on the introduction of the voting procedure, Lima Ajeva will join us then. And for those that have the time to stay a little longer, we are happy to take another 10 minutes to actually take you through the voting live, so you can benefit from having Lima present to take any question in case you would have any difficulty in casting your vote. But we will introduce the written voting anyway, also the voting guide. But for those that like to stay a little longer, we will keep the webinar open, and you can then follow Lima just step by step to cast your vote. So having said that, I think we can go into the webinar now, and I will start by introducing to you the drafting process. So we go to the next slide. And when doing so, I think everybody is aware that the preparation of this network code was a huge exercise. I think earlier on we already told you about the many meetings and experts that are involved. And that is also very important because we are working on a strategic topic here for the future of the DSO. So this network code has a real strategic impact. So much work is done in the expert group, but also in the joint development team between ENTSO-E and DSO Entity, as I said, co-chaired by Torsten Knop and also a lot of other experts. For instance, we're co-chairing some of the subgroups. And apart from that, we had an intense interaction with the drafting committee. In the drafting committee, the external stakeholders are represented. So we were able to also take their view on board when preparing the network code. And all of this was supported by the Secretariat. Now, going to the next chart, I can see that you can see that the regulation is driving an important part of the exercise, because earlier on, ACER has defined the framework that we have followed. That was in December 22. Then in March 23, we got the letter from the European Commission to jointly prepare with ENTSO-E a draft for the network code. And well, a little bit more than a year later, here is where we are. We are ready to submit the draft to ACER, ultimately by the 8th of May. So it is not ending there, right? As you can see also at the bottom of this chart, upon our draft being submitted, ACER will run another public consultation and have some other interactions. And then by the end of this year, ACER will submit the amended draft to the European Commission, which will then be reviewed and put into action later. So the final endorsement is not yet ready now, but it will take a bit more time. And obviously, throughout the entire procedure, DSO Entity and ENTSO-E will stay tuned and involved in any change and amendment. So we also will keep you posted on further developments. But for today, we are ready to submit the draft, and that is what this webinar is about, and that is what we will ask you to vote on at the end of the webinar. On the next chart, I illustrate the internal process that we have gone through. It has been an intense timeline. In just over a year, a lot of work has been done. It started all with the letter to proceed by DG ENER in March, and in a lot of sessions with the board, but also with country expert group, strategic advisory group, and other expert groups, we have collected a lot of input. And also in some specific sessions with the board, we have collected the guidance from the board, what to work on in June 23. Then we had the public consultation, and a lot of comments were submitted and reviewed by the team by then. And in March, we had another extensive discussion with the board, and we took on board a lot of internal review comments, again, through the strategic advisory group, country expert group, and other expert groups. Now that all has been processed, obviously in parallel with ENTSO-E, and now here in April and May, we are in the stage of final decision making. So last week on the board meeting, we have had an extensive discussion, and we have followed up on that, and we think that the decision of the board has been executed and is now ready for your endorsement, and we will do that in a written vote. So the approval of the board needs to be endorsed by the General Assembly, and as we have explained in the General Assembly a couple of weeks ago, we would like to take the opportunity for this network code to do that in a written vote. So it makes it more efficient for both the Secretariat and the members of the General Assembly, that you can cast the vote at the moment that suits you best. Still, there is a window, so it needs to be done before next Monday, the 6th, ultimately, to make sure that we can wrap it all up and submit to ACER on the 8th of May. So having said all that on the process, I think we can hand over to Torsten, who will introduce the main framework for the network code and also introduce the several topics that are of importance for you. I have one little suggestion. I'm not sure if anybody has his microphone open. Normally that should not be possible. I hear a little bit of noise at the background, but I hope that everybody can still hear the voices clearly. So please, Torsten, over to you to introduce the main structure and topics to the participants.
That with the noise might have been me, Peter. Sorry for that. I opened my microphone a bit too early. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity, and thanks everybody who's in this webinar for in this Ask Me Anything session for the interest in the topic. I think it certainly deserves it. We do have, I also see that we do have currently 3 out of 4 subgroup chairs, co-chairs in the call. So if you have any questions, they can give you a much more detailed explanation than anybody else can. What was this network code for? The network code, basically, I mean, there's a lot of text on this chart. We don't go through that, but the basic idea in the first half is to say, this is the one opportunity for European legislation, implementing legislation in this case. This is the one opportunity to advance flexibility connected to distribution grids. We do have a chance to have harmonize certain rules, but we of course look very carefully, what do we harmonize, what do we leave to member states. But this is really the chance through the network code itself, through all the rules that are attached to it, TCMs that are rules on the European level. There are also 7 T&Cs, terms and conditions on member state level, to provide an impulse really to make the use of flexibility that's connected to distribution grids a reality. And I think that's an opportunity that we should really use, and we did our best to, well, devise the ideal framework that was possible under these circumstances. So it's not to be underestimated. The second part of this chart basically says, what is it? It's, of course, it's a draft of, I think, 127 pages now of the network code itself. There is a supporting document explaining in further detail why certain decisions have been made. And we are asking you also for approval not only of these two, but also for approval of an overview of amendments to existing network codes. That's mostly the System Operations Guideline, SOGL, and the Electricity Balancing Guideline, EBGL, that are connected to this network. But could I have the next chart, please? Thank you. I'd like to take you through the main contents, but then we can, of course, open the floor for questions you have, and especially the subgroup chairs will try to reply in detail. The general provisions, mostly it's about process there. It's about the process mostly to draw, it's about a lot more, but it's about the process to draw up these TCMs and especially the TNCs. The TNCs are on a national level. The new thing is that we would expect system operators from the DSO and TSO side on a national level jointly to prepare the TCMs, to develop and draft them, and then of course they are submitted to the National Regulatory Authority for approval. We do still have options in that part, meaning we couldn't fully align with NSOE. There are basically two places where we still have options in the network code. This is one of these two, because NSOE thinks that the process how to come or how we come to the process to do these TCMs should not be done only, it's a possibility, but it should not necessarily be done by DSOs and TSOs together, but it can also be decided by the member state or the NRA directly. And we think that the design of how we then work together to submit the TNCs together should also be done by the system operators. I think that is the main difference at the moment that we have there. But it is significant, because if you delegate it to the member state or the NRAs, they might in many countries say, well, we let only a few DSOs participate, not all of them. What about the smaller ones? So where we insist that we really have a say in designing this, how we do it together is especially for, well, we have a special eye there on our smaller members, and that we find suitable ways to incorporate them into such a process. So that is where we still have what we call options. And the Article 48 mentioned in here, you'll find that under 5A meanwhile. The next thing is aggregation model. That's basically, we've been tasked with this. It's of huge importance to market participants. It's how does the service provider interact with the supplier? What happens if they change their balancing position and so on? The importance for system operators, for DSOs, is mostly indirect. We, of course, want this to function so that flexibility can indeed be realized. And we also want, well, we don't want to be really involved in there. It was a very important, very controversial thing. All the aspects there were, but I don't think it's, well, for us, it's of an indirect importance in the first place. Next chart, please. Much debated, of course, for flexibility is baseline. So how do we determine what the providers of flexibility would have done if they had not provided flexibility, and then you measure flexibility against the baseline? It is complicated. There has been tons of literature on this one. The important thing is to say there are, of course, not common baselines across all member states. There are not even common methodologies across all member states, but the member states are so different that they have to find their own methodologies. But we have taken certain steps to make that clear. The baseline, for example, we've introduced the idea of a European baseline register. So if the methodology is approved in one member state, you can transfer it to another one. You can still reject it, but you have to give reasons why you reject it. So we think that we make the whole process of arriving at baseline methodologies easier and also more accessible for market participants, which can then enter the market. Next chart, please. Thanks. Product pre-qualification. This is not grid pre-qualification. We'll come to that later. It's product pre-qualification. So how do service providers and individual assets or groups of assets qualify to provide flexibility? And the main step is that this has changed from the product pre-qualification, except for standard balancing products, but these are not ours. For all of our products, this has changed from pre-qualification as the default to ex-post verification as the default, because the necessity to pre-qualify your product has been cited by many market participants as one of the main obstacles to active participation in the market. There are, however, possibilities to go back to product pre-qualification if this is deemed necessary. We identify the conditions when this is necessary, and then also say how it can be done. One thing that is still open, especially in view of product pre-qualification, is how does this align with balancing? I mean, balancing has had a long history of product pre-qualification. For standard balancing process, as I said, it's still the default. However, there's a close connection with product pre-qualification for our products, and you should basically, the idea is if you qualify for one product, it should be similar for other products. And that's where we try to create this fine line in saying we leave and we acknowledge that balancing conditions should be set by TSO, but they are connected to what the conditions are for our local services. So while we respect their autonomy, we also have to get into certain aspects and also into the decision-making of how this is defined. And that is also something where we still align with the existing network codes, where we say what is where and how do we get to a common solution there that brings both of these into a balance. We've not fully have a solution but we still continue on that one. And if you would basically approve what we've suggested to you, that will be very helpful for making perhaps these last few steps. Another crucial one is the flexibility register. So everybody that's providing flexibility to system operators has to register there. And of course, the question is, who is operating that register? How is it organized? Does it have to be a central register? We said no, it can also be a decentralized register if the effect is the same of a centralized register. And this has been one of our old demands that we've had basically from the old days of the Active System Management report 6 or 7 years ago. So very happy to see that in there, and very happy also to see a flexible approach to this one. Next chart, please. Market design, many different things. Of course, it's first of all, we have been asked to further specify conditions on how NRAs, National Regulatory Authorities, can deviate from the default market design as specified in our congestion management in Article 32.1 of the directive, or for redispatch in 13.3 of the regulation. Almost all member states, 26 out of 27, basically opt for some kind of rules-based system, which often complements market-based. And what we did decide after long discussion also with stakeholders, and what we suggest now is, yes, there should be, if you go for rules-based, you should do a CBA, and you should check every 2 years back on that CBA, on that cost-benefit analysis, whether substantial conditions have changed and whether you might have to reevaluate. But there's no automatic re-evaluation every 2 years. This should also apply to existing systems that are already in place. There's no public consultation, which would make the process much longer. So we basically had to concede something, but I think at least until now, somehow these restrictions have held, and I think most member states will be able to work with that. Still think rules-based for the time being is an important component of the whole picture, and we wanted to make it possible to retain that if possible. The other thing is the relationship with the new instrument of flexible connection agreements, and after long discussion, we agreed that organized markets and flexible connection agreements should probably be linked in the activation phase or through the activation. And if you only activate your FCA because, for example, there's no activation price, then you have to take a closer look. Is it really where you want to go on a member state level, and re-examine whether this is hindering the introduction of organized markets. But I think it's a huge step, not saying you don't really systematically evaluate the relationship of FCA and organized markets while you're contracting the capacity or while you set up the conditions, but they basically come together in activation. That certainly is important. And then, of course, market design. I think this is also the chart. It's a question of the local market operator, before we forget that. That is the second option thing we have. The question is, how do we start these local markets for flexibility? And our answer is that we assign the role and responsibility to every system operator procuring their flexibility products. For us, it would be congestion management and voltage control. And then that system operator, every single DSO that does that, is automatically the local market operator. That, of course, can be delegated. This is only the role and responsibility. But the doing can be delegated to a platform, to a joint platform, to something that we do together with TSOs, to something that we do together, everybody of us, or you can, of course, do it yourself. That is completely open. But we think that this assignment of the responsibility, basically immediately after you start doing this, puts a task at the doorstep of system operator that get things moving. They are basically forced to enable these local markets without doing it themselves. And the TSOs, of course, want more of a process. They want to process 2 years of proposals, then 1 year of the NRA deciding. That takes much longer. And that would then basically lead to the NRA to decide who is the local market operator. They, of course, do that because in at least some member states, they calculate that this NRA decision will lead that to saying, well, the TSO is doing balancing already. Why can't they just do the local markets as well? So I think it's really behind this is, on the one hand, the question, how fast do we want things to start? But behind that, in many member states, is a very particular interest in saying, I have an idea how much I do want to participate in this business of organizing local markets as a system operator or not, or whether I want to leave it to the TSOs, and of course, from the TSO side, the same thing as well. That is why we couldn't agree on something there. It's very, very difficult. That's why this is a second point where we still have options. Next chart, please. Thank you. Yeah, there was something that is remotely connected to flexibility. We were tasked with this. We took up the task. The basic idea is that they say, of course, if you want to own or operate storage as a system operator, there are two possibilities. There's the fully integrated network component, the FINC, and then you have the tendering procedure. This is about the tendering procedure, and the two major changes introduced here is to say the tender should not be for storage, but for flexibility, which basically also is the fundamental reason why it's in this code. And the other thing is that there should be the possibility to have shared ownership of storage facilities. This sharing can be either in parts or time, but nothing really spectacular here. Next one, please. Next chart, please. Thanks. Same thing with distribution network development plans, which of course we have to make. We've been tasked to further specify how they are made. Again, the logic is because you have to consider flexibility in these network development plans. We've been through a process there. We had an elaborate approach that has been considerably shortened. And I think the version that we now have leaves open all the freedom the member states need to design both the process and exactly how you take into account flexibilities in these network development plans. So we try to restrict member states as little as possible in how they set up their system, and I think we've succeeded quite well here. TSO-DSO and DSO-DSO cooperation. There's the concept of the observability area, and we have the two things where you basically can deny market access. One is the longer term, it's grid pre-qualification, and the other one is more short term, it's temporary limits. How do they function? Who is involved in deciding whether you have a process? And we basically agreed that we can always have grid pre-qualification processes to check whether it's possible or not. And of course, how are market participants or all our market participants compensated at all. It's about data exchange. Data exchange, we basically do not define data formats, but we define relations and processes in other documents, mostly implementing acts, how we come to standardized data formats between between system operators and system users, between market operators and system users, between system operators and market platforms, between system users and system users, all kinds of different relationships, but we do not have the standards directly in here, but we open the framework for it. Voltage control, last thing, yeah, it's one thing that we had to address, but it's as small as possible. It's only about reactive power. Active power, it's the same as all the other flexibility. It's only going beyond the rules-based system and the connection codes, and then markets are only there for long-term products. So it's a very, very tiny part of voltage control services that are potentially opened to market-based procurement here instead of rules-based procurement, and we managed to keep it as small as possible. Next, and I think that's the last one then. Thank you. You see here a number of amendments we discussed that are many of them are consensus and natural for existing network codes. The minimum bit size of balancing products is mostly a TSO thing. We basically also left it to them. There is, of course, the imbalance adjustment that now has to be done for local services as well, as because until now it has only been done for balancing, the effects of balancing. Grid pre-qualification we had already, but it interacts, of course, with this famous Article 182 from the SOGL, and I mentioned the observability area where there are many connections, both to SOGL and to the data sets to be provided as per core. But most of them have been more or less consensual. We still have open questions, as I said, about the housing. Should it be in the network code, or should it be mostly in the SOGL? And this applies to things like where is the pre-qualification, but also for some things that are taken out of the demand connection code, which is where we all agree, but should they be placed in the SOGL or the NCDR? I think that is it, and then I hand back over again. Let's see.
Thank you very much, Torsten.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, now it's fine. So thanks again, Torsten, for the nice overview. So now we will jump into the next agenda point, where Peter will walk us through the board decision and how it was implemented. And just a reminder, if you have any questions so far, feel free to write it in the chat, in the Q&A section. And then after this agenda point, we will allocate some time to answer if any question. Okay, thank you very much. And Peter, the floor is yours.
So let me open my microphone. Everybody can hear me again. Thank you, Carlos, and also thank you, Torsten, for introducing all the work done. And there are two last slides, I think, that are appropriate to share with you before opening the floor for the Q&A, as already introduced by Carlos, because the vote you need to take is about endorsing the board decision that has been approved earlier. And let me introduce you to that. Because after all the work was done and a lot of preparation and exchange also with the board, after all, last Monday, the 22nd, we had a board meeting where we put the draft of the network code for approval. And through the expert group and the development team, two options were brought to the board for their consideration and a choice to be made on either option A to be approved or option B. And if we go to the next click, I can explain to you that by unanimous advice also of the expert group for demand flexibility, option B was approved by the board, also taking reference to the MOU. Because where we have done a lot of work, but we also know that some topics are not yet on a joint position. So the board asked the expert group and the development team to see if there were further options, since also the MOU that governs the cooperation between NSOE and DSO entity makes reference to that. So in a bit more detail on the next click, the board asked the expert group and the development team to first make sure that there is a true common understanding on any concern that was there, with a specific eye on the topics that did not have a joint position yet, and then based on that finalize the text. And as a last click on this slide, if no further consensus could be achieved, then we will use the option to submit the draft of the network code as it is, with dual options in some areas. And the dual options, as you can imagine, represent either a more TSO-oriented view or a more DSO-oriented view. Based on that decision, and then we go to the next chart, the development team has done a lot of work, and they started out with working on the improvements for the technical consistency and legal quality. Hang on. Sorry, I need to make one little break. One moment. Yeah. So as I said, the development team, guided also by the board decision, and the expert group experts have worked on technical improvements for consistency and legal quality, and they have worked on further converging, and where possible, there was also foreseen in an exchange when needed beyond working level, and 2 volunteers of the board were appointed for that. And in sum, and we have also given the feedback to the board yesterday, we can now see that the joint development team had a very elaborative exchange on April 23rd and 24th, in which a lot of further technical improvements were achieved to develop the consistency and the legal quality in the final draft. And there was also a further exchange on the open topics where dual options were introduced. And here, both the development team, but also beyond working level, with one of the board volunteers from both sides and SOE and DSO entity, it was concluded that after all, at the moment where we are, we can be satisfied that both organizations have done a lot of work, and that consensus was achieved in many, many areas, as also was introduced by Torsten, and that we're also happy to continue to work on a joint position for the open areas. However, also it was concluded that, mainly also due to a lack of time, we cannot do that now, since both sides, both NSOE and DSO entity, also need to start the respective decision-making procedures. And that is also a very strict procedure on our side and on the side of NSOE. And we must ensure that the 8th of May is the final day that we can submit that. So everything is aligned to meet that deadline. So it was concluded that we cannot work on that for now. So when I then try to conclude and bring the proposal that will be voted on in the General Assembly, I can summarize that the actions have been carried out in accordance with the board decision and guidelines. So the decision of the board is fulfilled. And based on that, the board decision is now sent to the General Assembly for endorsement, which means that we will ask you, and we will introduce that in the next section, we will ask you to endorse the board decision to send the draft as it is now, including the dual options that have been agreed between NSOE and DSO entity for this moment. So I stop here now, and I hand over to Carlos, and obviously to you, to see if there is any question, and we are happy to take that either in general or more specifically also through the specialists that have been joining the webinar to answer your questions.
Okay, thank you, Peter. So far, I don't see any questions, so maybe we give a couple of minutes if any of the participants wants to make a question. If not, we will move to the next agenda point. Here we have one question. Says, will the dual option be made clear for voting?
Let me answer that one before, if there are any technical details, Torsten can tell that. But I interpret the question such that the question is if the General Assembly needs to vote on the dual options. Well, that is not the case. The draft for the network code has been approved now by the board. So the only thing we ask you now is to endorse the board decision. Further guidance can be found in the documents that we have shared. Now, in the next weeks and the next month to come, and perhaps Torsten can elaborate on that, obviously we will try to further converge on the options. But the board is now satisfied also by the unanimous advice of the expert group and the development team to submit the draft as it is. And the draft as such is not for discussion in the General Assembly. In the General Assembly, we, well, in a way, very simply ask you to endorse the board decision or not. You can also vote against that. But since the board has taken the decision with a big majority, and since it is on the unanimous advice of the expert group, we are confident that the General Assembly will also endorse that decision. So I hope, Falk, that I made it clear from the more statutory approach, but I can ask Torsten to elaborate a bit more in general terms. So I don't think we need to go into the details, but we can be transparent on how we view how to get there.
Well, based on the board decision, of course, the expert group on the, 23rd
Torsten,
and 24th.
Can you speak?
Yeah, I speak. I do speak. Don't you hear me?
Torsten, one way or another, you are muted.
Can you hear me?
I can hear Torsten perfectly.
Thanks, Lima. Based on the board decision, we elaborated in the development team on the 23rd and 24th of May, further possibilities for compromise. We also agreed on all these suggestions, red lines, whatever coming back from the market committee and the board. We have left these two fields of options that we just have shown you, and we would interpret the board decision that we are still asked to carefully have a look at in an escalation procedure, which now involves selected board members, to have a careful look at whether there is anything further possible. And I think that there are things that are very much written in stone among the options, but there are also other things where you can have maybe a close look and see that there's really not that much substantial difference, perhaps, where it could still further align. So we, on these points that the board had, we still carefully in a process still to align further, try to align further. Then, of course, we will still make, my understanding is we will still make technical improvements. I always say if on the, you basically approve the content of the text as it is with this provision that there can be further alignments, but you are asked to approve the content as a General Assembly, but not the exact wording. My example always is to say, if we discover a spelling mistake on the 7th of May, we will of course correct that, even though you've not seen this one. So we will try to make further technical improvements in the weeks that's left and try to align further. Beyond the 8th of May, my understanding is that we will of course still, whatever the form then is, that the entity and ENTSO-E will strive to cooperate. The process, as Peter has shown, goes on. There is Acer is now in the driving seat, but they will consult. They will talk to us on specific issues. They've already scheduled the calls for these talks, and we will of course try to convey together with ENTSO-E to them common positions as far as this is possible. Does this help?
I see another question also by Victor on behalf of CIDE. And I see another one incoming, but let me be clear, and I hope that it is also clear for everybody, that indeed we can inform you about the options. I'm happy to share that after the webinar. but I don't think we need to discuss them now. Normally, I think, and I hope that the General Assembly can follow the board decision that the dual option version is good to share, and there is no choice made. So therefore, the board proposes to submit the draft as it is with the dual options. However, we can add one more slide, and technically at the moment it's not possible, but we will distribute it after the meeting so that you have the information at your hand. But it is included in the board decision to have the dual options as a part of the package that we submit to the Acer for further processing. Okay, I go back to Carlos to see if there's any further question.
Yes. There are no more questions. Only a comment from Carmen thanking the work done by the development team. And I think that's all. So if no more questions, I think we can move to the next agenda point, where we will look into the voting procedure. So, Peter, the floor is yours.
Yeah. So thank you, Carlos. And this part, I will introduce myself, and then Lima will give you further details. And for those that are ready to already cast their vote, we are happy to lead you through step by step. But first, Lima will introduce it in general. Now, let me summarize again. I already introduced it when summarizing the board decision, but what the written vote of the General Assembly is about endorsing the proposal of the network code that is approved by the board to be submitted to Acer. And to make it a bit more convenient for you, and also to make it efficient for the Secretariat, we will do this in a written vote. So that means that you have an open window to cast your vote starting today. So the vote is open already until the 6th of May. This is next Monday. And I can also confirm that for this way of voting, the same rules apply as we always use for the double majority that needs to be met to have the valid decision. Now, on the next chart, and where you do it is in the normal member portal. So here is the formality that is also circulated to the General Assembly participants that have registered for the vote. So the formal decision to be taken is as follows, also referring to the regulation, which gives us the mandate to do this in 2019/943. The specific decision is that the General Assembly endorses the decision of the Board of Directors to submit the proposal of the network code on demand response to Acer on the 8th of May. And the package that we will submit has been introduced to you by Torsten, and we have also explained to you that it includes dual options, but it is the advice of the board to endorse their decision to submit it. And as usual, you can cast your vote, you can give yes or no or abstain. The voting window, as I already summarized, is from today until Monday the 6th, and the usual rules for a quorum and double majority will be applied. And the documents, including the supporting documents, which reminds me also that in those documents the dual options are written in, but as we promised you, we will circulate a summarizing slide on that. The documents have been shared with you yesterday through the regular mail to all those that have registered for the written vote, and they are available in the member portal, and that is where also Lima will show you how to get there. So this is my general introduction, and I see that Lima is already online. So I think you can take it from here to summarize the instructions, and if there's anything left, we will take further questions, and then we will wrap up the webinar. But for those who would like to stay, we will have another 10 minutes that step by step, guided by Lima, you can cast your vote if you desire to do so. But first to Lima to introduce the voting guide.
Yeah, I think all of you, this is not your first rodeo, so you've all already voted in the past. So what you would need is to go to your member portal, and the usual way, just log into your account with name plus password. This registration is mandatory for you to be able to vote. Also, pre-registration was mandatory. So in case if you have not registered yet to the event, you will not be able to vote. Normally, the registration is still open for those who have forgotten. So what you can still do is still register for the event, and then the voting will be visible for you as well. If you cannot access your account, please send an email to Tommaso, and he will be happy to help you or send you a new link to be able to access your account. Next slide, please. So there are two ways of voting. You can do this via your laptop by going to the following link, which is mentioned on the slide. Or you can use your smartphone, scan this QR code, and do this via your smartphone. Next slide, please. So the system, as usual, you just log into your account by clicking on sign in on the website. You fill out your email address and your password. You then click on sign in. Then you will be redirected to this page. On the right upper hand, you will see the word mentioned votes. I have now published the question. So if you click on votes, you will see the question published for the endorsement of the network code demand response. So here you can see an example how it looks like. Then you select your answer and then you submit it. So this is how it looks like on your phone. It is it's the same principle, it's just on a smaller screen. So if you are doing this by your phone, you will then have to click on the 3 stripes, which are in the right upper corner. Then you go to votes, and then you will also see the question and you're able to vote.
Okay.
Yes, so I think we can continue, or?
Yeah, so Lima, thank you. And this was, let's say, just to refresh your memory. If we now go to the next slide. In fact, we can now wrap up the webinar. But before we do so, let me check, apart from any, let's say, specific question on the voting, and we can take that afterwards. But in general, is there any question about the voting or any doubt about how to vote? We have tried to summarize the content of the network code. We have tried to summarize the procedure. We have followed the statutory rules, and the board has taken a valid decision. So now it is up to you to endorse that board decision. And we hope we have made that clear to you, and that you can also really endorse that and then enable us to submit the draft to Acer upon other steps will be taken. But for now, according to our statutory rules, we ask you to endorse the board decision. And let me check if there are any further questions on that. I see a question of Joachim, but that is a specific one. So let us do the following. We will first go back to Carlos to wrap up the webinar, and then we keep the session open. So for those that would like to go over it with Lima one more time, we take 1 minute to let people go who are ready to finish the webinar. And then we'll go over it again and take any of your questions and see that we can get you into the system to get the vote done. But first, back to Carlos to finish the webinar.
Okay, thank you, Peter, very much. And thank you, Torsten, for your presentations. I think today, as Peter just mentioned, we have seen the drafting process, how from the beginning until now, which is the end of the process for us. Then we have seen the nice a description of the key topics, the key takeaways for DSOs by Torsten. And then Peter walk us through the board decision and how this was implemented. And then finally, we had then also good, very good presentation of Lima to see the logistics on how to cast your vote. So now the next steps are for you to cast the votes between today and the 6th of May. And that's all. We can move to the next point, and those who wants to already cast the vote and see want to have the help of Lima, please stay in the call, and the rest, see you around. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I see that there's one question from Joaquin. Joaquin, you accidentally put yourself on not attending.
Okay,
That's why
so I see
cannot.
that some people are ready to leave, some others are staying. So Bram, perhaps we can go back to slide number 18, I think. And then Lima, may I ask you to go over that again? I'm not sure I saw somebody who cannot enter, but that might be a specific problem. We can also solve that outside of the meeting. But for those who would like, I would say pick up your smartphone or log in, and then Lima will run you through one more time. And after that,
Peter,
if
do you
anything
want
did
me
not
to
work, you
just
just let
go
us
over-
know by mail or in another way, and then we follow up outside of the webinar. But if we can check some of the questions and problems in the webinar, I think it would be the most efficient.
Peter,
So
can you
Lima,
hear me?
I give the floor back to you again for those that would like to follow you and try to type their vote response directly.
Can you hear me? Yes, Joaquin, I'm not sure if you heard my answer, but you have accidentally registered as not attending. So that's why you didn't see the vote. So I have put you now on attending so you can see the question now. Can you confirm that you see the question now? Okay, so all right, Peter, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah.
Yes. Would you like me to maybe show it live in the system with me sharing my screen?
Okay.
Or
Yeah.
should we just
Then
go over the
if you
slides?
if you can share your screen, it might even be all the more easy. I'm not sure. Do you have the right to
No, it
present?
won't be possible. So I will just do it with the slides. Yeah.
Yeah. No, but let
Okay.
me check. Perhaps Bram can give you the option to share. So we take 1 minute, and then if you can share your screen, it might be all the more easy. But
Yeah. 1 second. No, I don't have access to share. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I can do now. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, you can share. Okay, that's great. So you take over the screen and you show how to do it. Great.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, so once you have logged in, you will see on the right upper corner the word votes. You click on that, you will see the question, you select your response, and then you submit. If you have any issues, please use the chat. I can live support you. I'm not sure. There are no questions in the chat. No. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I see that also a lot of people have left the meeting, so I cannot hear you, Peter.
No, but that is not a problem. We just offer this as a sort of extra service
Yeah.
for those who had a problem or wanted to cast their vote directly.
Yeah.
And I think you have shown it quite well. And also the voting guide is part of the documentation that you
Yeah.
can find on
I
the member
think,
portal.
Peter, maybe it would be good to to send the participants maybe a recap email with the documents and the voting guide.
Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah,
So we'll find a way to share that, and we'll
Yeah.
include other information on that.
okay.
Okay. All
So,
right.
yes, I suppose that I can't see the question. Bernd, did you register to the if you can't see a question, this means you haven't registered. So that's the only explanation. So if you haven't registered, you won't see any question. And I don't see any registration from your side. So what I can do is try to register you. And then you can double check if you see the question. But in the future, you need to register before you can vote.
So Bernd now says that he is registered, but perhaps there is a mistake there.
I will check.
So we will check, Bernd, if it works, and if not, then please send a mail to Tommaso or Lima, and then we will follow up after the meeting to help
Yes,
you out.
Bernd, you are registered as non-attending, which I think maybe was an accident. I will now put you on attending. Okay, now can you please refresh and then double check if you can see the question? So if you accidentally post yourself on not attending, you will not see the option again to register. So that's why it says that you're registered, because you put yourself on non-registered.
Okay. I think, Bernd, with this information, normally you should be able to make the vote. And if not, please send a mail to Lima or to Tommaso, and we will help you outside of this meeting. Okay. Now, I think this is a good moment to also wrap up this optional voluntary instruction session by Lima. And I'm confident that everybody by now knows how to do the voting. And we will keep an eye on getting the votes in timely and send you a gentle reminder if we are lagging behind. But thank you so much for joining, and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.